Change. Joining us now, Alice Klein, co-founder of Now Magazine in Toronto, Bruce Brugman, editor and founder of the San Francisco Bay Guardian, and Alan Kay, member of the Institute for Alternative Journalism. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
What does this mean, alternative press? Alan?
It's a tough term. I mean, we like it and we don't like it at the same time. The alternative press is an important journalistic body all its own, but we perceive ourselves as doing some important journalistic work that makes us somewhat different from the major mainstream daily newspapers.
So that's what you're an alternative to, the daily major newspapers?
The corporate-owned newspapers, that's an important element of the whole thing.
So when you started your paper in San Francisco, back in the 60s, was it?
1966.
What was the idea then?
To present an alternative form of journalism to the local daily monopoly paper. See, 98% of American cities have only one newspaper, and so we represent the alternative in the competition in most American cities.
But Alice, was it the sort of thing with the alternative press where you took particular issues, particular specific stories, rather than cover the news of the world, the news of the city?
Well, yeah, I think that alternative newspapers do another thing, which is put the active, involved community in a local community together, the people who are doing things together with the people who are the audience for that. So we kind of put the local musicians and artists and community activists together with their natural constituency.
Okay, now Alan, back in the 60s, the image at least we have today was those alternative papers were started by the hippies, people call the hippies, with long hair, and they were basically left of center most of the time, anti-establishment, certainly anti-American. Is that a correct image, or is that just propaganda?
Well, I have trouble with all of those as stereotypes. There's an element of truth, of course, to all of those, although the anti-American causes me a little bit of discomfort.
That was in Canada.
I think that these newspapers were started by people who believed that the free flow of information was important as a social and political force, and that information was not being freely available. Clearly, there was a political underpinning to all of this, but we are all journalists, serious, committed journalists, and our business is empowering people by getting them important information.
In San Francisco, where you started your paper, Bruce, I assume you were going after the Vietnam War?
Yes, we were very much against the war in Vietnam. We were very much against what we call the Manhattanization of San Francisco, all of these issues. In a sense, we were right. We were right on the war in Vietnam. We were right about Manhattanization. We were right about a lot of these issues.
And you also would have taken up, sorry, you were going to jump in.
And we're still sort of writing about many of those very same things.
That's right.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of the alternative papers in North America deal with issues like Nicaragua, for example, which is, some would say, the Vietnam of today, housing issues, issues of development. And, I think many of us try to be on the cutting edge.
And in Canada, the issues, the stories, basically the same as they would have been in the States?
Well, I think we have a lot of our own stories, and I think we share a lot of stories just as we share the continent with each other.
How has it changed, Alan, over these past 20 years? What's happened to the alternative press?
Well, the issues have changed, obviously, and we have all grown up. We have grown older. We have lived through this business for 20 years now. I think we understand a lot more how to do it and how to do it well. Our readers have grown along with us, and we've established a stronger bond. We and they understand more of what each other wants and what each other is doing.
But when you look at papers like the Village Voice that started out over 30 years ago, and back in the 60s you never trusted anybody over 30, it's now 31 years old, the Village Voice, you had Rolling Stone in Britain, here we had Georgia Strait in this country. They've all achieved almost the status of icon. They're about as establishment as you can get. Does that mean the Village Voice and Rolling Stone are no longer alternative papers, or have they sold out?
It's a dynamic business. I mean, they are alternatives in New York City, for example, to the New York Post and the Times, and yet there are a whole spate of new newspapers that started up in New York City that are alternatives to the Voice. It's a constant dynamic pattern of development. It's fascinating.
Do you want to make profit? Do you want to make money with your paper?
Well, I think that that's important for it to be a self-sustaining, long-lasting enterprise, which I think is a really worthwhile thing to create. Okay. But it's not, it certainly, I don't think, was the absolute first thing on our minds when we decided to start a new newspaper.
Sure, because the idea was you had a message you want to get to the world.
I don't think so much a particular message as believing in the sort of local community, believing that news doesn't just happen in the little sort of pinpricks on the planet of New York and LA and Washington, but sort of believing that Toronto is a real locus for you know, newsworthy activity.
But if, let me put this to you, Bruce, if profit becomes a factor, doesn't that change the editorial integrity? Suddenly it's not what's the story we want to tell because it's important, it's how are we going to sell papers?
Well, we needed more profit for many years. And the point of profit is that then you can hire people and do the news and print the news and raise hell, which is our motto, with the
That's
idea
your
of
motto?
paying some people. That's right. It's the newspaper's duty to print the news and raise hell. That's kind of our market position, you see. We're entrepreneurs, and we go up against whatever the local big operation is.
You talked about being all serious journalists. Do you think you're treated as serious journalists by mainstream journalism?
We force mainstream journalists to deal with us seriously because we do the kinds of stories that make them jealous, that they wish they had done. And we cover, as one element of the journalism we do, what the news business is doing as a business. And boy, that makes them pay attention to us.
And the key difference is they'll cover meetings and official events, and we'll cover concepts and ideas and the big stories in our community, and we can follow them to the very end, you see. So in San Francisco, it's feminism and peace and war and, you know, these kinds of issues that come up.
All right. In Canada, Alice, is the alternative press growing, on the way out? What's the status of it?
Oh, well, it's growing and developing, and I mean the best example of that is Now Magazine's tremendous growth over the last few years. Unfortunately, we don't have enough alternative papers in enough centers in Canada, and hopefully over the next few years, you know, more and more will develop. And I think that the success of Now Magazine here in Toronto shows that there's tons and tons of potential.
Thank you all for talking with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
We'll be right back.